When I talk about getting maximum value from your land while still being ecologically responsible, land leases and access agreements are a part of that. Let's talk carefully about these areas that can cause some contention of leasing parts of your land to other people. And this will also help you be aware of the opportunity to lease land that might be underutilized. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. So, if you're going to get your homestead up and running quick, you might live in a small town or a city near rural or agricultural land. Very often, the agricultural land is underutilized. Perhaps it's older farmers that don't work the land as much anymore, or it could be a landowner looking for a different arrangement that would be more ecologically sound to support that piece of land. In the other case is you could own rural land now but not currently be using it and find an income opportunity to lease that land to someone else. Now let me start right up front and explain to you that land leases tend to be like $20 an acre per year. It's not a big revenue source, but it could be the difference between keeping an agricultural exemption or agricultural rights or lowering your property taxes or otherwise having deferred maintenance taken care of on your property. So, for example, if you're renting land to a cattle farmer, part of the agreement may be fence maintenance, it may be reseeding, mowing, different types of things that are standard activities in the cattle raising activity, but ultimately prevent the degradation of your land or property. And so you can lease land to a single farmer or the same piece of land to multiple farmers depending on the arrangement. And so in my case, I own land, but I am actually under contract to run somebody else's animals on the land. And so the land that I own is worth nothing. It's worth very little. It's distressed land. It'll be 10, 15 years before that land is a high quality asset. But right now, it is valuable enough to uh, do farm a contract farm and allow someone else's animals on my land. Now, am I going to get rich doing this? No, but it justifies the agricultural extension. It helps develop the land because there'll be fencing that goes in place that I can get under a cooperative agreement. Because, by the way, you could be leasing land to somebody and they need fencing, and you may need to pay for that or at least pay a share of that because you get the improved value of land. So this is a little bit more complex than simply just handshake agreement. You do need to have a written agreement. You need to understand what is the improved value of the land for the farmer's use of it. So the farmer's going to do maintenance. They're going to, in many cases, grazing properly done increases soil fertility. You have to think about alternative uses of the land. But all these things you would think about anyway, and it's a natural part of owning land. So if you've got a homestead and currently you've got a zone one garden in the permaculture concept around your garden space, and the rest of your land is 50, 60 acres and you're tired of mowing it, or you're not cutting enough hay to use and the hay bales stay out in the field, you could partner through a lease or rental agreement with a local farmer who could bale the hay for you at no cost to you and give you the bales that you need, but they take off all the other bales and use them in their activity. It could be for large livestock, it could be for small livestock, it could be the difference between looking out over a derelict piece of property or looking out over a small bison herd or a small cattle herd or goats or sheep or something that is going to increase the value of your property if done the right way. Now, in my program where we talk about generating income from your land, you may say, well, Justin, I don't want $35 a year to rent out land. So Joel Saliston talks about how he's able to have hundreds of acres of land that he doesn't own, that he's able to pay $100 per acre per year for that land, when typically it's only like $16 an acre per year or $30 an acre per year. It will barely cover your taxes in most cases. The reason is that Joel Saliston has a system, whether it's his pigerator system or it's a cattle system or it's a cattle and chicken system. He's got a system that he can apply to the land that doesn't degrade the soil, that doesn't destroy the habitat, that ultimately raises volumes of meat on acreage. But he has talent, he has skills, he has a team of people that's been trained to do this, and then he's able to lease the land around his area. That may not be available in your environment. So, what you want to start with is simple leases. Now, the way I look at it when I work with a client, so if we have a private client sitting down and talking about this, we want to assume that you're going to use the land, and renting out the land to another farmer is just one of many options. So, let's say you have an open hayfield, 15 to 20 acres, It's got a nice perimeter fence that needs a little bit of work. We want to figure out what the cost is to restore the perimeter fence. We want to know what type of fencing it is. Is it cattle fencing or goat fencing or sheep and goat fencing? Or is it suitable for smaller animals or larger animals? Does it have a barn on it? We want to know all that stuff and then ultimately start developing what is the price for you to get maximum value from the land, because that's ideal. If you have a farmer coming on and off your land, there's the liability concern they might get hurt. There's the permissions and privacy. There's the fact that farmers have different schedules than homesteaders or different schedules than urban people. It might limit your ability to hunt the land. And so ultimately, we have to be looking at these things. What is the ideal use of the land for you? And then from there, we can come back off and find an ideal tenant for the land to help you start cash flowing it right away. Now, if you get a really good tenant like Joel Salatin or one of his students, you could get 100 an acre. It's not likely. But that 35 an acre or whatever the covers your tax value has value beyond just the money you receive in rent. And this is critically important. And this is where homesteading skills and household management comes into farm management. So let's say you've got 15 or 20 acres with a fence, and a farmer is willing to come in and run their livestock on your property, and they're going to repair the fences. The fence repair has monetary value. So you've got the rent, and now you have improved infrastructure. Now, the farmer may want a longer or a shorter lease depending on what their needs are, but if they're going to replace fencing, you can expect a longer lease period or a cost sharing associated with the fence replacement. So, for example, you have cattle fencing with barbed wire, and they're going to need electric fencing with a sheep or a goat fence. There might be some adjustments there. It may be a situation where you lease the land to them. They bring their own electric fence that can be removed after their lease ends, or they're using temporary fencing, and you just give them the electricity for free because it doesn't really take that much. Or they have solar charged fences. Every situation will be unique, and you have to think about this. This farmer is going to drive on and off your land. They might need to segment the fencing on the land. They may have different schedules for cutting the grass. So maybe you've cut that 15 acres into hay, and you were borrowing someone else's equipment, and it's all fine. But what if you own the equipment? What if you've got 50, 60 acres of hay and you own this equipment, and you're going to lease this out for someone else to cut hay, and now you've got the cost of equipment? See, the farming activity justifies the tax breaks and even in some cases incentives and grants. And so if you do nothing with the land, you will always lose. But if you rent out the land the right way, there's considerations to consider. Now, in the case of where you own equipment, maybe you've inherited a farm and you own equipment, you can now have an operator run the equipment. And so you're owning the operation, you're not renting the land. So now you just hire an operator to run the equipment. That operator could be a neighboring farmer. And then you do a revenue share or you do some kind of pay. Do you see how we have different approaches? Now, the great thing about different approaches is that it gives you options. So there may not be a local farmer that is going to be available to manage your land. Now, it really depends on the size of the land. But let's say you have 15 or 20 acres of land and you're near a city and you're not able to live on the land, but you have can't find a farmer to manage the land. You don't want to hire a caretaker to take care of the land because you don't know what you want them to grow. Well, then another option, of course, is to turn that land into a community garden, turn that land into a cooperative, bring on additional farmers, maybe start building a community around that land to administer the land. Now, one of the things that we also do, and I'm not going to go through all the hundreds or so different ways to make money from your land, because some of these ways that we're talking about today actually don't make you any money. They save you money. They keep the land under good management. They help you improve the land, but you're not getting cash. And so one of the ways that I showed in a couple videos is that we actually put trails on the land. So a piece of land that I'm managing, I make no money with it. It costs me money every month to have the piece of land. It was derelict, overgrown land. It has brambles and brush and little tiny trees, and there's no timber value to the land. Well, I got a forest mulcher, and you can see that in those videos. I had the forest mulcher go through and put trails on the land. So the day the forest mulcher was finished, I could ride my mountain bike out there. I could hike out there. I could camp out there. I could start using the land. I remember when I first started surveying the land itself, And then of course the owner can do all these things as well. But my agreement with the owner is that I get use of the land because I'm a caretaker. I'm a nomadic farm manager in what we're doing right now, and we'll talk more about that as we develop some of these programs. We start bringing in folks to take classes, but um, the trails on the land makes the land accessible. But it's not as easy as just sending a forest mulcher out there. We had to survey, we had to do mapping, we had to talk with the owner's needs, we had to talk with the neighbor's needs, we had to look at the assessment of the area. But ultimately, I was able to find hardscape roads on this property and clear those hardscape roads. And as soon as that forest mulcher pulled off that piece of land, I could start the activities. The owner could start the activities. I could bring in campers. I think we do have it set up as a hip camp. We haven't had any campers out yet, but it's set up as a hip camp. Um, these are things that you can do. So, but here's some drawbacks. You will have other people on your land, so there are insurance concerns. You will have a change in lifestyle. Maybe you like looking at that land, but you don't want to put the effort in to create a meadow or wildflowers. You may not have the skill set necessary to really utilize that land today. You may have fears or concerns about, you live someplace else. Can I really keep up with the land? If you own land, you have to have some core elements straight, whether or not you're renting it out. But if you're renting that land out to a local farmer, they will help save you trouble. So let's talk about physical security. One of the problems in my region with land that is accessible is that people with four wheelers or people who are poaching will access the land, poach animals, run four wheelers, and that is, of course, a liability. It's very often they're detrimental to the piece of land, and then ultimately they could construe the ownership of the land. So what does that mean? Anytime somebody crosses your property to access property they own, and you allow them to cross the property at a specific location, they could eventually petition for an easement, or they can have an easement that is construed, and then you could have land that is not usable. So, for example, if someone crosses your land with a utility power, for example, the area around the utilities becomes utility right away, and now you have limited use and access to that land. So if someone is running a pig farm on your property and they got permits to do a pig farm, you will not be able to, after that, grow vegetables because there could be contamination issues. There could be water contamination problems. Now, the best solution for this is to sit down with somebody like myself, who's a consultant, and help map this out. But you can also sit down with your local agricultural extension. You can sit down with your like a farm credit, and you can talk to them and say, look, if I lease this land out, how does it impact my mortgage? How does it impact my insurance? How does it impact my lifestyle? You can draw up a plan. You can map out the land. Maybe you don't lease all the land, you only lease part of it. But most of the agreements that I see that work very well is a symbiotic relationship between you and the farmer, because that farmer is going to be out there on the land. And if they see somebody's been cut your fence to run a four wheeler through, I was surveying a piece of property and someone had cut the fences in order to run their four wheelers across this guy's 70 acres. Now, it was 70 acres of woods to him, and the front half of the woods you couldn't really access, but they had cut so many four wheel trails in the back of that property, illegally, by the way, trespassing on that property, that he had the liability if someone got hurt because he did not maintain his fencing. See, they don't, the way the government works, they don't care if someone cut the fence. Nobody filed a trespassing. So you hear all these four wheelers back there, it must be okay because you permitted it. They didn't have proper signage. They didn't have proper. The best thing for your property is to default no access, no hunting without authorization. And then, of course, that authorization is always a written agreement. But ultimately, can you see how not understanding these concepts can cause some misconceptions? Now, I like to have farmers or caretakers or someone else on the land periodically who are expected to do certain types of inspections. So, a farmer who's running livestock on your land will inspect your fences multiple times a week. They're going to make sure those fences are strong. They're going to make sure those fences don't lose any animals, or animals don't get stuck in the fencing. If they're cutting hay, very often they will lime and they will use calcium out there, and they may rake your field, for example, or drag your fields. But you can have somebody leasing your field for hay, and then also having someone out there running cattle. But if the cattle guy's eating the ground too low and they're not properly rotating, then you're going to compromise your hay contract. So you want to have a management plan, even though this is a little bit of passive income and actually leasing the same land multiple times. You need to have some kind of agreement so that you know who's responsible for what. Now, I have seen agreements where the owners will set up the fencing, so you're going to put fencing anyway. So you put up some really nice fencing, and then you lease it out to multiple types of farmers. So maybe you have a small farmer who's running cattle, and then behind the cattle runs chicken, and then behind that runs a pig system, and then there's a rest period, and you've got enough land to do this. Well, then you could get $100, $200 per acre in revenue, even though you're not doing the primary farming activity. You're now managing a farm, or maybe all your focus is on your homestead, and you've got value added product at the homestead. You've got small livestock like chickens or rabbits and stuff at the homestead, and then that back 40 that you're not using anyway is being cultivated. It's being improved. It's having these contracts out there so that you can get the additional labor necessary to manage a farm without actually having to pay directly for the labor. So that $15 you get an acre, that $30 you get an acre could be complete profit for what you're doing. And all of the other costs, whether, like if you hired caretaker and stuff, the other costs are now sunk into the farmer's activity. And then, of course, we want to be friendly. We want to have a good communications and interaction because, hearing a tractor go through at 6 o'clock in the morning might seem inconvenient, but it's way more convenient than paying an extra $2,000-$3,000 a year on property taxes. It's way more convenient than having someone running across your land and destroying it because there's unauthorized access to your land. Having the right paperwork in place is much better than finding out later that now there's an easement that crosses your property with utilities or road access, and now you lose access to your land or it segments your property. For example, you may not be aware of this, but a easement for access between two neighbors, if the neighbor turns around and turns their 40 acres into a development, can now turn into a county road. And then a county road that provides through access could become a state road. And so now you could have a piece of property where you were just letting them drive across the middle of a farm field turn into a split down the middle of your property. Now, again, when you're ready to do this, we have a coaching program. We have additional resources and materials that'll help you be aware of how to think about this. The concept of homesteading we have here is not industrial, but it's more like a gentleman's estate. It's multiple streams of income that are financing your lifestyle, that are ultimately giving you the access to land in a way that doesn't degrade the land, that improves wildlife, because somebody cutting your hay doesn't mean you can't hunt it. That somebody's improving habitat for other animals, such as grouse or bird life. Maybe you've got a lake with a watershed. There's so many opportunities. Unfortunately, I see a lot of folks that don't understand the nuances of what we're discussing here, and they'll rent land to the neighbor and they'll complain about a ton of electric fencing and they can't even walk across their own land. And, they hear the farmer out there in the morning and in the evening and all hours of the day. And then sometimes the neighbors will even complain. And so you'll have frustrations if this is not properly structured. But then again, if you properly structure this could mean additional income for your homestead. This could mean a benefit of lifestyle. I've seen, for example, somebody raising cows and taking the cows to milk processing, and that the cattle farmer has got hundreds of thousands of dollars of infrastructure in this, and then they provide raw milk as in lieu of payment for the renting of the land, or they're paying like $25 an acre for the land because it's a rotational seasonal grazing, but every month the owner of that land is getting raw milk, which they were turning into cheeses and kefir and different types of value-added product, and then their cost of goods went to zero. So they're getting a below market rate for the rental of the land. These cows are crossing the land, of course, manuring the land, mineralizing the land. There's a little bit of mowing that happens from time to time because cows don't like really deep grass. But the value add was that little bit of margin, which was the fresh raw milk that they were then processing into cheese and kefir and using for their family and using for their customers. Can you see how this works, folks? Homesteading is a lot more than what you see on these videos. I know the videos are entertaining, they're fun to do, but if you're serious about starting a homestead, small farm, and eventually cultivating that into like a gentleman's estate or like a generational asset, which you can pass on, something gives you food security, physical security, and a good peace of mind for a lifestyle of freedom and a lifestyle of fresh air, then you have to consider these other elements. Don't make the mistakes of getting into a lease agreement or a deal that you can't get out of. Don't make a mistake of not utilizing your land to the best of its abilities. Like Joel Salatin says, that land has a certain expression and you can help it cultivate. You can help it express. You can feed your neighbors. You can feed your community. You can become that pillar of a community we talk about by building these values. Again, there's insurance consideration, there's land rights consideration, there's value of the property consideration, there's tax consideration. These are all things that we help private clients with when it comes to the land management. Now, I'm going to leave you with one thing, because you might be saying, I don't have ready agricultural land. Now, I told you the situation for the land that I'm managing, that's been scrubland, it's in poor condition, it's not worth a dime, but we were able to get access points onto it. We're getting water onto it. I'm doing a lot of development on this land for the owners of the land in relationship to these contracts that I'll use to raise goats. But what if you have timberland? What if you have hunting land? Well, the same concepts apply, just different application. And again, that's what I want to reveal to you here. You don't have to dream about what you want to do with a property. You don't have to wish you could do something with a property. You can start that right now. Now, sometimes it's through someone else's means. Somebody else is looking for land right now, and you're going to help them on your land, and you're going to structure it in a way that it improves the value of the land, and they're going to get discounts because they're improving the land, and you're not having to pay for their labor. Or it could be hiring a caretaker, which a lot of folks will do as well. But again, it's a written plan. This is a subset of the design plan that we talk about in permaculture. This is part of the operational elements of your plan, and it's part of what helps you cash flow your property. Because it's a whole lot easier to do a 2-acre wildflower meadow when you have the money to pay $75 a pound for the seed, or to go out there and enjoy a garden, or to enjoy the views and the sights, even if you don't use the land all the time. Again, if you have questions about what we've covered here today or success stories, I'd love to hear from you. You can visit www.prosperityhomestead.org. Go to the contact page, ask your questions. I love answering your questions. That's why we do the podcasts. And then if you want free resources, a newsletter, and other tools to help you get on the land fast, especially right now when food security is questionable, when supply chains have been disrupted, when people are worried about physical security, you can get out of the city and get to that land, get secured, get stable, and then build that generational family farm, build that generational homestead, build that estate. And yes, you can do it, and we can show you how. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org for more resources and to ask your questions. Thanks for listening.